A precise strike blew the occupiers apart. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine destroyed a Russian Black Sea Fleet ship near Novorossiysk. The Ukrainian armed forces hit a ship that the Russians had put into service in 2015. Its value is about $60 million. There are only 4 such vessels in Russia. Now there are 3 left. Additionally, agents of the AT movement fired at the air defense plant in Tula and destroyed a communications tower. Meanwhile, in Belarus, a secret military base is being built. Construction work in the south of the country is now in full swing. The construction area is about the size of 280 football fields. Russian media report that a Russian missile complex called Oreshnik may be stationed here.
Based on this information, it is possible to expand the scope of informational and environmental operations. What has been confirmed is that, indeed, on the territory of the Republic of Belarus, there is a modernized military base near Osipovichi, where the 465th Missile Brigade is stationed. It should be noted that 3 new hangars have indeed been built there, housing complexes from Kanderpi.
And while Lukashenko is secretly carrying out Putin's orders, Poland is completely closing its borders with Belarus from the night of September 11th to 12th, including railway crossings. The country officially took this step because of the Russian-Belarusian military exercises that begin on Friday. But in reality, of course, the real reason is those very drones that were flying toward Poland, including from Belarusian territory.
According to the scenario of these military exercises, the so-called Suwałki corridor will be implemented, meaning an invasion from the territory of the Republic of Belarus, with the goal of creating a land corridor that would connect the Republic of Belarus with the Russian enclave in the Kaliningrad region. Therefore, such preventive actions by the Polish side are a response to possible threats. And yes,
in Poland, they continue to count Kremlin drones. Let us recall that about 15 Russian UAV wrecks have been found on the country's territory. One of the drones crashed on the territory of a military base, and Putin's Geran drones were equipped with additional fuel tanks, which allowed these UAVs to cover a distance of more than 700 kilometers. And here's what's important to note. The drones that entered Poland weren't just flying anywhere, but were heading toward the NATO base in Rzeszów. I wonder if after this, the alliance will continue to just express concern for much longer.
I don't rule out that this is actually an element of a planned provocation by the Russian side. The technical specifications of the Geran, a range of up to 450 kilometers. The main version currently being promoted by the Russian side is that the Geran drones were suppressed by Ukraine's electronic warfare air defense systems, changed their course, and as a result, after deviating, violated Polish airspace. Let me emphasize again, most of the Geran drones were launched directly from the territory of the Republic. The Geran drones were launched directly from the territory of the Republic.
In turn, the German Chancellor stated,
that to destroy a Geran drone, which costs $10,000, a missile costing about $1.5 million is used. This accordingly indicates the bloc's unpreparedness to repel large-scale attacks, whether from the Russian Federation or the Republic of Belarus, on NATO countries' territory, using aerodynamic missile means.
Meanwhile, Russia continues to use the territory of Crimea for its military logistics. From the very first days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it has been transferring its troops to the southern front in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, using the Kerch Bridge for this purpose.
But the Russian Federation fully understands the key importance of Crimea. This includes, accordingly, the infrastructure and military bases, as well as its role as a springboard for further pressure on mainland Ukraine. That is why the main objective of the Russian Federation is to hold on to the peninsula by military means.
And to fight the occupiers, the United Kingdom and Ukraine are launching local production of interceptor drones, which will be effective in destroying Russian Shaheds and other strike UAVs.
Glory to the heroes, Serhiy. Let's start with the new details about the Russian Federation's drone attack on Poland. Information has emerged that there were several components involved, as I understand it. Mostly these were groups of unarmed drones, decoys and mock-ups, but 5 armed drones were headed toward Rzeszów, to a NATO military base, no less. What do you personally think Vladimir Putin was trying to demonstrate with this particular attack on Poland? And in your opinion, was this attack essentially Russia shooting itself in the foot, or did they actually manage to achieve any significant successes?
You know, I don't understand why it took Poland and NATO allies several hours or even almost a whole day to figure out that some of these drones were actually flying toward Rzeszów, because when the first reports came in that airports were being closed, including in the city of Rzeszów, it immediately became clear that the logistics hub through which aid is sent to Ukraine was under attack. The pieces of the puzzle fit together right away. So obviously, as my colleague mentioned in the report, additional UAVs were over Gerberry and they had to fly at least 700 kilometers. Clearly, all of this was prepared in advance. These UAVs didn't just appear in the air and attach themselves. It was a pre-planned provocation. I don't know to what extent this can be linked to the Zapad 2025 exercises currently taking place in the Republic of Belarus. There's also a very interesting nuance that came up today, and I'll remind you about these Russian drone attacks, but it raises some questions we can even try to answer nevertheless. Indeed, what Russia really wanted to show was, look, we are ready to escalate, we are ready to threaten NATO countries, because repeatedly, both Putin himself and his close team have said, if NATO countries continue to provide more active assistance to Ukraine, then obviously they will find themselves participants in what Russians call the conflict, in other words, the Russian-Ukrainian war. It's obvious that this armed provocation, as I said, was already being prepared. Obviously, its goal was to try, in public statements, to separate NATO countries from the situation in Ukraine. In other words, to try, let's say, to reduce Western aid to our country, because everyone understood perfectly well that Poland would start arming itself, acquiring aircraft and strengthening its air defense systems, and as a result, these resources would not go to Ukraine. But in part, the Russians' expectations did not come true, because Sweden immediately announced that it was ready to help Poland with air defense systems and accordingly with aircraft. The Netherlands, which participated in countering this attack, also joined in and said, we are ready to help build a layered air defense system for Poland. And against this backdrop, this is why we so often talk about the importance of the informational aspect of this war, because literally just a few hours after this armed attack, and it is indeed an armed attack by the Russian Federation on the Republic of Poland, we need to call things by their proper names. A certain sociological study immediately appeared. Well, you don't need to be a researcher or work in sociology to understand that sociological surveys can't be conducted within just a few hours. So these data and the question itself were about who was to blame, who was immediately at fault for Russian drones flying into or attacking Poland. With a margin of 2%, a small difference, but still, Ukraine ended up in first place as the one to blame, then the Russian Federation, and after that, other answer options followed. So we clearly understand that, among other things, this informational component was present. First of all, and secondly, against this backdrop, Russian agents will try to create new hotspots of anti-Ukrainian hysteria, there's no other way to call it, meaning they will once again try to set the stage for emotional reactions and the spread of anti-Ukrainian sentiment, which of course exists among a very small but nonetheless present part of Polish society. Anti-Ukrainian sentiment in the sense that Ukraine should not be helped. And indeed, look, we need to strengthen our own security, but instead we are helping Ukraine. In turn, you know, I noticed that this can also be used by the Russian Federation, by local Polish military recruitment centers. I'll call them that for clarity. Somehow we didn't see lines of future soldiers ready to sign up for the Polish army without invitations or draft notices. That's why Russia will also say, look, they're not even ready to defend their own country. So all these aspects need to be concealed and presented in a certain way. And is this a shot in the foot for Putin? I think that once again, Putin realizes that those articles of the NATO Charter, which the future or current members of the alliance dreamed about, particularly Article 4 and especially Article 5, are in reality just declarations. With all due respect to NATO, it turns out that today NATO, something we've always spoken about with a bit of irony and will continue to say, is that modern military alliances should be built around Ukraine. And now I'm even more convinced of this. So it turns out that the actual operating algorithm of the North Atlantic Alliance simply doesn't work, to be honest. They invoked Article 4, it sounds impressive, but in reality, it's just consultations. And as for Article 5, it doesn't actually obligate NATO member states to immediately send their troops to defend another NATO member. It's up to each country to decide, do we want to defend, will we defend, or will we not participate at all? But in any case, I hope that this would also be a good, positive development for us. This story, let me repeat, is about the armed attack by the Russian Federation on the Republic and more. So at this moment, I think our European colleagues and allies understand perfectly well that today it is impossible to reduce assistance to Ukraine. Moreover, today it is necessary to increase this assistance because it is Ukraine that is in fact single-handedly protecting NATO's airspace. And Europe, first and foremost, well, if we say that Ukraine will not improve its air defense system, then next time something else will follow the Shaheds. Well, not Shaheds this time. Next time, if not Shaheds, then Gerans will fly, or God forbid, missiles will be launched. That's why the European community needs not just to think and consult right now, but to make decisions as quickly as possible. And in fact, Ukraine is the only country that is not a member of NATO and generally does not join such military political alliances, although, for example, there are good reasons to create one with the Baltics, Poland, and Ukraine. So Ukraine has proposed concrete options for solving the problems of participation. We are ready to help the Poles, to teach them, including probably mobile fire teams, and also to train warriors to shoot down those very Shaheds with Vulcan systems. And today, as far as I understand, literally right before our broadcast, Reuters published information that the Poles and Ukrainians have agreed that it will be Ukrainians who will teach Polish soldiers and officers how to shoot down Shaheds. If this information is confirmed, well, to say that this is bad or wrong would be incorrect. On the contrary, it's a good thing. This shows that Ukraine is ready to be a member of NATO because all our standards today, including combat and military standards, are very close to those of the North Atlantic Alliance. Putin really is shooting himself in the foot. And now this victory, which they are probably celebrating in the Kremlin, well, I suppose there is something for them to mark after all, seems to be for them not just their first victory, but it actually happened.
Well, we should also agree on payment for this kind of training, right? Let's take weapons, for example. You give us Patriots, right? And we'll give you more instructors. You give us, say, ATACMS, please, or at least Taurus, well, if it's from Europe, right? Sergei, we both understand this perfectly well. I think the Kremlin sees this as a victory because even Zelensky says that there are a lot of statements from NATO countries, but little action. And this is a very dangerous trend because you can keep playing around with Article 4 for a long time, right? And keep blowing things up, saying that NATO has responded and is ready to defend every inch of its territory. Putin likes the tactic of both small cuts and small jabs. This was the first test jab at the alliance. What should we expect from him next? Will Poland be the only object of his attention? Especially in light of the upcoming military exercises in Belarus, experts are already saying that the Baltic countries and Poland should prepare themselves. They will be testing exactly where and how NATO is capable of responding to aggression.
That's exactly what I wanted to clarify. Poland is not the first. Let's recall, not so long ago, NATO seemed very distant. Absolutely right. We're talking about the Baltic countries where something flew in and it turned out to be Russian drones. As they say, they swallowed it, right? There was no tough response. In general, you know, the Baltic countries are a kind of litmus test, a historical one, and we shouldn't forget about that either. Actually, just like Ukraine. But right now, we're talking about the Baltic countries. Let's recall the events that preceded the beginning, not just of World War II, but also other stages of World War II, particularly the attack by Nazi Germany on the Soviet Union, or more precisely, the preemptive strike, because both sides had mutual intentions to attack each other. So, in fact, at that time, the Baltic countries were actually the first, and Poland itself as well. Let's recall the beginning of World War II, the division and so on. Poland, and not only Poland. So, in fact, Poland is not just a warning bell, it's an alarm bell. I wouldn't want it to, yes, just like none of us would. You, the Poles and Ukrainians as well. I wouldn't want this bell to start ringing out with an alarm because that would have serious consequences for all of Europe. And we in Ukraine understand this perfectly, even better than the Poles or anyone else. No offense to anyone. By the way, let's always remember and thank our allies, especially the Poles, because they gave us tremendous support at the start of the full-scale resistance. And even today, despite certain internal political issues, they continue to support us, including, by the way, in those very internal matters. The Russians, after all, calculate everything very well. We have to give the enemy their due, right? The enemy is dangerous, and that will make victory over them all the more satisfying. So the Russians are taking into account, among other things, Poland's current internal political disputes. They see all of this perfectly well, and they understand it completely. And today the Poles need to understand, as we feel it here in Ukraine, that all internal squabbles must be set aside. Today, there is only one enemy. They have simply revealed themselves again, once more declaring, here I am, the enemy. Not Ukraine, not the stadiums in Ukraine named after Ukrainian national heroes. That's not who the Poles are fighting against. Today, the Poles must, above all, not fight among themselves. They need to understand that they must stand together with Ukraine because Russia is the enemy. There it is. And we always say that, yes, today in the Kremlin, as I have already mentioned, they are probably celebrating some kind of victory. NATO is tired, and I won't dwell now on NATO's capabilities. There has already been a lot said about that today, but nevertheless, most importantly, we must clearly understand that, strangely enough, thanks to this very event today, Europe has a unique chance not just to talk, but to truly unite. Not into some amorphous structures where they just consult and then in the evening sit in a restaurant and casually ask, so what's happening in Ukraine? Now we can look at what's happening in Rzeszów, what's happening in Lublin, what's happening in Warsaw. They just flew there, right? So we fully understand the state of Polish society as well. We perceive what happened differently. The Poles psychologically are not ready for this today. As far as I know, even the alarm siren didn't go off. The Poles found out about the events only when they had already started collecting those drones. They shot down 4 out of 19, right? 4 out of 19. I'm not trying to laugh at anyone right now like you don't know how to do it. They don't know how. Let's learn. I'll say it again. We're ready to lend a helping hand. I'm fully aware of that. And the Russians are counting on the fact that today Polish F-16S won't enter Ukrainian airspace to shoot down those missiles and Shaheds. We understand that. But today, the Poles possess the capability to shoot down both incoming missiles and attacking drones almost entirely on their own sovereign territory, very close to their state border. Would such a significant development be of great help for Ukraine? Of course, the answer is unequivocally yes. In any case, I think the military will figure it out very quickly. There just needs to be a political decision, the will to act. Ukraine has demonstrated its political will. The position has been stated. There is practically a proposal on the table. Therefore, we cannot allow Russia to take advantage of this fact, especially against the backdrop of these exercises. Yes, from a military point of view, I am also ready to assert this now. This is my subjective point of view. From a military standpoint, these exercises do not pose a threat to Ukraine. That's how it is, because this is a command and staff exercise with an active phase. Mostly on the Russian side, these are conscripts, and on the Belarusian side as well, including them. Moreover, all this is happening against the backdrop of the Americans announcing that they are ready to open, or rather resume the work of their embassy in Minsk. We are seeing very clear contacts and signals, contacts between Lukashenko and the Americans. That can't be a coincidence, can it? On the one hand and on the other, we understand that certain sanctions are being lifted from aviation enterprises in Belarus. They are taking advantage of the Russian summer. It also seems to me that first and foremost, this looks
like a gift to Putin because he can use this transit window. That's one. Second, it's the normalization of lifting sanctions, which could later be extended, and this practice could spread to the territory of the Russian Federation as well. And that's why flirting with Lukashenko today is going to be even more dangerous.
That's why I personally characterize the events in Poland this way. But first, as I said, this is Russia attacking the entire public in Poland. A sovereign state, that's the main thing. And second, today marks the beginning of a new stage in the battle for Europe. What I mean is that in this theater of military operations, just as Ukraine is a theater of military operations in Central Europe, China, through its proxy state, the Russian Federation, will come into play. We understand that all of this is being done by Russian hands. And in fact, the Americans, who I hope will eventually come to their senses and won't want to lose Europe, because Europe is important for the Americans as well. That's why it's very important to call things by their proper names. Ukraine has done this. NATO today is probably still in some ways looking back over its shoulder. Are we doing the right thing? Yes, the main thing is not to be afraid.
In fact, if you analyze it seriously, Putin has essentially created all the conditions today for NATO to close the skies over Ukraine within the framework of NATO countries' security. But in order to make such a decision, you really need to have political guts, not just discuss Article 4 of the NATO Charter. All right, Sergei. But then it turns out that with Putin undermining trust, even without needing to destroy the alliance's structure itself, when it comes to eroding trust in the alliance, two beneficiaries come to the forefront. They are China and the United States of America, because a frightened Europe will run to one of these two for security guarantees. Most of them, of course, will turn to the United States. Am I understanding this correctly? And then it becomes possible to twist their arms with all sorts of economic tariffs, concessions, indulgences, and so on, essentially making them dance to your tune in exchange for security guarantees. And in that case, is the alliance now considering that there is a struggle for NATO's own survival?
You know, I think that European countries themselves should be thinking today that it's not just about NATO anymore, or not even primarily about NATO. As for NATO, you know, it's like that saying, either speak well of it or say nothing at all. But in reality, we call things by their proper names. Ukraine could have changed this situation if people had rallied around us, but that's the honest truth. Today, Europe needs to consider whether it will survive at all. I'm not talking about geography today, no. Today, I'm talking about political statuses and military political statuses as well. Well, with the British, everything is clear. Yes, because they're the British. They're not in the European Union. They justified their decision, made it, and probably don't regret it today either. So for Europe to truly be Europe as a unified structure, it must fulfill several conditions. First and foremost, yes, it needs to create a new European security system. We can't say today that Europe is capable of creating a global security system. But without this European element, no one will be able to build a new world order, neither the Chinese nor the Americans. And you know, as we say in Odessa, maybe I'll put it a bit bluntly, but still, whoever gets up first gets the slippers. Because whoever acts first and wins Europe over, including by helping it obtain clear, thoroughly discussed security guarantees down to every detail, will truly, if not rule, then at least interact with Europe on equal terms and know that Europe will always be by your side and help you in difficult times. Again, this also applies to China and accordingly to the United States of America. That's why the Shanghai summit, the Shanghai meeting itself, showed this perfectly. As I already mentioned, Russia has become a proxy state, a raw materials appendage of China, but by now only the lazy haven't said this. Everyone has already discussed and explained why. In any case, we also clearly understand that China, of course, is counting on Europe because Russia is just a source of raw materials. They are exhausting Russia and will continue to act more actively and aggressively towards it. Russia won't even notice this, but maybe when they wake up from their Hawthorne moonshine stupor, they might. That's precisely why events are currently developing at a very rapid pace, and we will undoubtedly witness significant and profound major changes, especially when it comes to the crucial security guarantee system and the emerging New World Order.
Of course, it would be nice to watch these events from the sidelines rather than being right in the thick of it, but that's just how it is, right? Thank you so much, Sergei, for finding the time, sharing your analysis, and defending Ukraine. I never get tired of saying this. Sergei Brachuk is the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army. He joined us today. All the best, and until next time.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.